The Minnesota House of Representatives is more than halfway through its legislative session, and with less than 2 months left, the House floor has seen its share of action. We spoke with Speaker of the House Kurt Zellers and House Minority Leader Paul Thissen to get their overall thoughts on the legislative session and how they, as leaders of their respective caucuses, have managed their responsibilities. For the first time in 38 years, the Republican majority control both houses of the legislature. Can you tell me how that has affected the DFL caucus in the House?
You know, it's a little different for me because in the House we've been in the minority and in the majority, so we're not as far away from that perspective, and it also helps a lot that we have a Democratic governor for the first time in 20 years, who's provided, I think, great leadership over the course of this session, his first 100 or so days. I think the real strength that we've had as Democrats this year, as we have been very consistent both in the House and the Senate about what our values are, what our principles are, and the way we want to approach balancing the budget and getting people back to work, which are the two premier issues before the legislature this year. And I think that has actually been different than in the past, where the House and the Senate have actually among Democrats have actually communicated and shared the same strategy and approach.
A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal for the preceding day.
How does your legislative style differ from when the DFL controlled both houses?
Well, I think the one thing that was really refreshing, and one thing we've done with the governor as well, since we're all new, we can make up our own rules. And I don't say that from a standpoint of here's what you must do or here's what you should do, but we can find out what works for us. Amy and I worked really well together. She said we're almost like brother and sister, and I said, well, except without the fights, and we've actually done a good job. Senator Michelle and Majority Leader Dean also being new to the process, but I think we also bring a kind of a happy optimism to the Capitol on both bodies, that bad things can happen all day, but we're not going to wait for them to happen. We stay positive, and here's what the potential that's out there for good and for things that are really going to be happening that are exciting. But we really gave us that opportunity to say amongst ourselves, let's line up the committees, and we actually did that last November to say there's one House committee on taxation, there's one House committee and a Senate committee on health and human services, so that we could really line up the committee structures, so that if the average Minnesotan wanted to come down here and look at a bill or follow an idea, or students that come down here, they don't have to choose between the House and the Senate because they meet at the same time. And then it's a lot more user-friendly. We cut about 30% of the committees out, which is better for the process, because then you have more accountability and kind of one-stop shopping.
What have you found most challenging?
I would say, kind of dealing with everybody's roles outside of being down here at the Capitol. I was really surprised at, I've got this family thing, or I've got this commitment, I made this commitment a year ago, I can't miss. And so probably dealing with some of the things that we didn't have any idea would come up on a daily basis. And then I think the one thing I've learned that maybe we didn't do as good a job at first was over-communicating, telling somebody 2 or 3 or 4 times, here's what to expect, here's what's going to happen, and then because folks are really busy with whatever committee they're on, or on taxes and education, so I'm really focused on that. Maybe not paying attention to the floor schedule, or from a 10,000-foot view, here's what we're looking to do over the course of the session. So I would say it's probably one of the biggest things is just to learn you can't over communicate enough.
To meet the target, you're actually cutting about 1/3 and spending about 2/3 to get there, raising revenue of about 2/3 to get there.
What of your responsibilities have you found most challenging?
I think the biggest responsibility is making sure that what we're talking about as a caucus is consistent with where our members are, where the governor is, and really understanding some of the proposals that the Republicans are putting forward. I think one of the biggest challenges that we've had is the fact that a lot of the budgets that the Republicans have put forward have really hidden both taxes, tax increases, and hidden the deep cuts that are actually going to be affecting Minnesotans, and trying to bring those to light and make sure the people of Minnesota truly understand the consequences of this all-cuts budget. That's been a challenge that we continue to work on.
Now, Minority Leader Thissen, the Republican majority decided to hear finance bills first before policy bills, and that's something that's traditionally done in the reverse. Can you tell me how the DFL caucus has dealt with this?
Well, I don't think we've exactly seen in full measure how it's going to play out because the policy deadline hasn't been reached. Expect during this time between the budgets passing off the floor and the policy deadline that we'll start to see some of the social issues that kind of have been held in abeyance and maybe are a little bit more divisive among Minnesotans. I also think the fact that this fiscal deadline was pushed up so quickly is one of the causes of the challenges that they've had in actually putting together a budget. The fact that they're over $1 billion in money that actually doesn't add up, and some of the challenges that they've had in actually passing bills off the floor has partly been a result of the kind of reversal of those two deadlines.
Can you tell me what the majority was hoping to accomplish with this reversal?
We heard from the voters that managing the budget, balancing the budget without a tax increase is the main thing. So our goal was then to keep the main thing. And Chair Holberg, Ways and Means Committee Chair, said, a lot of times we have these discussions down here about what's a policy bill and what's a finance bill. And by having that finance deadline first, and we really did, we inverted them 100%, she said that's a good way to find out if a policy bill really spends money, because then it's a finance bill. It's not really a policy bill, it's a finance bill. So we purposely did it that way, gave ourselves more time then, so that people also aren't running from one committee to the next trying to pass their policy bill over here and watch a finance committee over there. We wanted to make sure that it was a better process by having people in their chairs focused on the finance bills, and then the policy bills will come with. And again, a really good way to vet out whether or not it's a policy bill that spends money, because then it's a finance bill. And I think finishing almost within I think maybe a day or two of our deadline, for our self-imposed deadline with our finance bills being out of Ways and Means and off the House floor, has given us more time then to negotiate with the governor, but also to get really good input from his commissioners and from our Senate and House colleagues on what is really important in these finance bills.
In your opinion, what has been the Republican majority's biggest success thus far this legislative session?
I think the number one thing, and we actually made it our number one House file, was the permitting and regulatory relief. I've been to all kinds of businesses, large, small, dairy farms, manufacturing plants, financial services companies, you name it. The one thing we heard time and time and time and again was Minnesota's regulations are just too much. It's just stifling us to the point where if I jump the river and go to Hudson, Wisconsin, I can get my building built 6 months faster. Or I go to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, it's built a year sooner than it would be here in Minnesota. So after hearing that, and again, that was across the board, any kind of business, small, large, big town, small town, we thought that was the number one thing that we had to keep, as a top of our agenda. In working with Governor Dayton on this, he put in some of these ideas that we had using executive order right away, which is a fantastic accomplishment. But then he said, this is very purposeful. We're putting this in place now because we're waiting for the law to come in. But once the law comes in, we're going to work together with the House and Senate. So I think that's my dad, who's a small business owner, said, he said a little bit more bluntly, he said, finally one of you guys in government went down there and cut some red tape. Now go back and do it again, which, is all well and good, but I think that is one of probably the biggest things that we've heard from the people that, from our standpoint, we're actually doing what we said we were going to do, and that was to make sure that it's easier to not only to site a building, but to get it built, but then it's also making Minnesota more competitive with our neighboring states, not just geographically around us, but competing with states that have a, 300 days of sun and, nice weather. We got a little challenge here for 6 months when it comes to our winters. We needed to have that extra, a little bit of help to make sure we're staying competitive.
Representative Thissen, in your opinion, can you tell me what the biggest success of the DFL minority has been?
Yeah, I think we have been very successful in holding the Republicans accountable for what, for the consequences of what their budgets have been. In the one circumstance where they worked with our members on the agriculture bill and that budget bill, that passed with strong bipartisan support. I think that is a model as we move forward. When the Republicans are willing to work with Democrats and get to a place that's relatively close to Governor Dayton, that's where we see success. And so I've been very pleased. I think the other thing that we've been very intentional and good about is actually getting outside the Capitol and meeting with constituents in their communities instead of forcing people to come down to the Capitol. So the public really has input in how we're approaching the real challenges we face this session.
Although Speaker of the House Kurt Zellers and Minority Leader Paul Thissen represent different sides of the aisle, both want to see the legislature complete its work by the final day of the legislative session. This year, that day is May 23rd. Remember to check out Session Weekly, which covers the House of Representatives with insightful and in-depth reporting, and tune in to House TV as it provides live coverage of House floor action and committee work this legislative session.